The world held its breath this morning. Because in modern warfare, there are certain assets you simply do not lose, and one of them may have just disappeared from the sky. According to emerging reports and defense analyses circulating across military circles, Iran has reportedly struck and destroyed one of Israel's most critical airborne surveillance platforms, an AWACS system, often described as the eye in the sky that coordinates air defense, detects incoming threats, and silently controls the battlefield from above. If confirmed, this is not just another strike. This is a strategic shock, because an AWACS is not a fighter jet. It is not easily replaceable. It is not expendable. It is the nerve center of aerial warfare, the system that allows an entire air force to see first, react faster, and dominate the skies. And now, suddenly, it may be gone. What makes this moment even more unsettling is the reported cost of the operation, just $5 million. That's the figure now being discussed across defense circles, a relatively low-cost strike that may have neutralized a platform worth hundreds of millions, possibly even more when factoring in its strategic value. In military terms, this is not just a hit, it is asymmetric warfare at its most dangerous. And it comes at a time when tensions between Iran and Israel are already spiraling. In recent days, we've seen missile exchanges, long-range strikes, and attacks reaching deeper into each other's territory than ever before. Iranian missiles have reportedly reached areas near sensitive Israeli sites, while Israeli forces have conducted deep strikes inside Iran, targeting infrastructure and leadership. The region is already on edge. Now this. Because if Iran has successfully targeted an airborne early warning system, something designed specifically to prevent surprise attacks, it raises a far more alarming question. How did this happen? Was this a technological breakthrough, a tactical vulnerability, or something far more concerning, an intelligence failure inside Israel's own defense network? And, perhaps most importantly, what happens next? Because when a nation loses its ability to see the battlefield in real time, even temporarily, it changes the rules of engagement, it creates openings, it invites escalation, and it forces decisions that can ripple far beyond the immediate conflict zone. From Washington to Moscow, from Beijing to Brussels, military planners are watching this moment closely. Because if this strike is real, it signals something much bigger than a single loss. It signals a shift in how wars may now be fought, and possibly how they spiral out of control. If you want to understand what this means, how we got here, and what could happen next, make sure you subscribe, because this story is still unfolding, and the next development could change everything. Timeline plus backstory. To understand how a single strike could trigger global alarm, you have to go back, far beyond today's headlines. Because this moment did not begin with an aircraft, it began decades ago. The rivalry between Iran and Israel is not a conventional conflict fought across shared borders. It is a shadow war, one defined by intelligence operations, proxy battles, cyber attacks, and long-range precision strikes. For years, both nations have avoided full-scale war, instead choosing to weaken each other indirectly. But that restraint has been eroding. The timeline of escalation tells a clear story. In the early 2000s, tensions intensified over Iran's nuclear program. Israel viewed it as an existential threat. Iran, in turn, framed its program as defensive. What followed was a covert campaign, assassinations of nuclear scientists, cyber attacks like Stuxnet, and quiet sabotage operations that were rarely acknowledged publicly but widely understood within intelligence circles. Then came the proxy phase. By the 2010s, Iran had expanded its regional influence through allied groups across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Israel responded with a sustained air campaign, hundreds of strikes targeting Iranian positions in Syria alone. These were calculated, controlled, and often unacknowledged, designed to push Iran back without triggering open war. For years, that balance held. until it didn't. The shift began accelerating in the early 2020s. Direct strikes started replacing deniable operations. Israeli forces reportedly hit deeper into Iranian territory. Iran responded with increasingly bold missile and drone attacks. Some launched directly rather than through proxies. Each side tested the other's thresholds, probing for weaknesses. Then came a critical turning point. Large-scale missile exchanges, once considered unthinkable, became reality. Air defense systems were activated at unprecedented levels. Regional airspace began closing intermittently as the risk of spillover increased. Civilian aviation routes shifted. Insurance costs for shipping surged. The shadow war was stepping into the light. And in that new phase, visibility became everything. This is where AWACS systems enter the picture. Airborne warning and control systems are not just surveillance tools, they are command hubs. They detect threats hundreds of kilometers away, coordinate fighter jets, track missile trajectories, and manage the entire aerial battlefield in real time. For a country like Israel, surrounded by potential threats and operating under constant alert, such systems are essential. They are the difference between reaction and anticipation, which is why they are rarely exposed to risk. And yet, in recent weeks, the operational tempo in the region has changed dramatically. According to defense tracking data and regional monitoring groups, there has been a sharp increase in aerial patrols, early warning missions, and long-duration surveillance flights. These systems have been flying more frequently, staying airborne longer, and operating closer to contested zones. In other words, they've been working harder than ever, and possibly becoming more vulnerable in the process. Then came the last 72 hours. Reports indicate a surge in electronic warfare activity, jamming signals, disrupted communications, and unusual radar behavior detected across parts of the region. At the same time, satellite imagery analysis suggested repositioning of both Iranian missile units and Israeli air assets. Something was building. Then, suddenly, this strike. A reported low-cost operation targeting one of the most sophisticated and valuable assets in modern air warfare. If the timeline tells us anything, it's this. This was not random. It was the result of years of escalation, weeks of preparation, and possibly days of precise tactical execution. And it may mark the moment when the shadow war fully transformed into something far more dangerous. Event breakdown. What exactly happened in the sky remains one of the most closely watched and most contested questions right now, because in modern warfare, the first version of events is rarely the final one. According to early regional monitoring reports, the incident unfolded during what appeared to be a routine high-altitude surveillance mission. The aircraft, believed to be operating as an airborne early warning platform, was flying within a controlled but highly sensitive air corridor, likely maintaining distance from direct threat zones while still monitoring regional activity. Then, something changed. Radar tracking data, as cited by independent observers, suggests a sudden disruption. The aircraft either disappeared from tracking systems or experienced a rapid descent profile inconsistent with normal operations. Within minutes, multiple signals intelligence channels began detecting unusual electromagnetic activity, often associated with electronic warfare or targeting systems. That is where the narratives begin to diverge. The Iranian narrative is precise and deliberate. Iranian-linked sources claim that the aircraft was successfully targeted using a coordinated strike involving advanced missile systems, potentially guided by electronic tracking data or radar lock-on capabilities. While some reports suggest the use of a surface-to-air missile system enhanced by real-time tracking data, others point towards a hybrid approach, combining drone surveillance with missile execution. More strikingly, these accounts emphasize efficiency, a relatively low-cost operation that achieved a high-value kill. If true, this would represent a significant demonstration of capability, showing that even the most protected airborne assets are no longer untouchable. But the Israeli side tells a very different story. Israeli defense channels have not confirmed the loss of any AWACS platform. Instead, some reports suggest the possibility of technical malfunction, electronic interference, or even deliberate misinformation being circulated as part of a broader psychological operation. There is also a third possibility quietly being discussed in defense circles: electronic warfare disruption. Modern AWACS systems rely heavily on complex radar and communication networks. If those systems are jammed, spoofed, or overwhelmed, the aircraft can effectively be blinded, cut off from reliable data, potentially forced into emergency maneuvers, or rendered temporarily inoperable. In such a scenario, the aircraft may not have been physically destroyed in a traditional strike. It may have been neutralized in a different way. Then there's the evidence problem. So far, there is no publicly verified wreckage, no confirmed satellite imagery released to the public, and no official acknowledgement that definitively settles the